The screech of tires cut through the air. Traffic lights flashed red above, horns blared, and the world seemed to slow in that terrifying instant. On the corner of a busy Nashville intersection, Emily Davis stumbled backward, right into the path of a massive 18-wheeler. Witnesses later said they saw a man's hand shove her hard between her shoulder blades. She didn't even have time to scream before the deafening blast of the truck's horn filled the street. Metal roared against asphalt. Brakes screeched, and onlookers covered their mouths. The man who pushed her, Daniel Price, stood frozen on the curb. His eyes darted from her crumpled body to the crowd forming around him. Someone shouted, "I saw what you did." Another yelled, "Call 911." But what no one in that moment knew, what made this crime even more twisted, was that only months earlier, Emily had been the one spoon-feeding Daniel soup in a hospital bed, holding his hand while he recovered from a near-fatal car crash. She had nursed him back to health, believing he loved her. Now she lay in the road, her blood pooling beneath her, while the man she once saved stood stone-faced, hiding a secret. He wanted her gone so he could be with another woman. Sirens wailed in the distance. An officer shoved through the crowd, eyes sweeping the scene. Witnesses were pointing fingers. The truck driver sat in his cab, pale and shaking. The paramedics were running. And Daniel was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. Emily Davis was the kind of person people described as soft-hearted to a fault. At 29 years old, she worked as a pediatric nurse at Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville. She loved her job, even if it meant long hours and emotionally draining shifts. Her friends often told her she cared too much about patients, about strangers, about people who didn't deserve it. But Emily never listened. She had been dating Daniel Price for just under 2 years. Daniel was 33, charming in a casual way, and had an easy smile that seemed to melt her stress away. They had met at a friend's barbecue, and from the first conversation, he made her feel like she was the only person in the world worth listening to. Their relationship wasn't perfect. Daniel could be moody, sometimes distant. But Emily chalked it up to stress from his job as a construction foreman. She believed in standing by someone through their rough patches. That was what love was, right? It was late January when everything changed. A heavy snowstorm had rolled into Tennessee, turning the roads into slick sheets of ice. Emily was on a night shift when she got the call. Daniel had been in a car accident. His truck had skidded on black ice, flipped over, and landed in a ditch. When she reached the hospital, he was unconscious, hooked up to wires and tubes. For weeks, Emily was at his bedside every spare moment she had. She spoon-fed him, helped him shower, paid his bills when he couldn't work. When he woke up crying one night, she held him until he fell asleep. She even took unpaid leave from work to care for him at home once he was discharged. Daniel seemed grateful. He would squeeze her hand and tell her she was his angel. But there were small cracks Emily didn't notice, or maybe didn't want to notice. His phone would buzz late at night, and he'd silence it quickly. When she asked who it was, he'd say, "Just a friend from work." Sometimes, when she walked into the room, he'd be grinning at his phone, and the moment he saw her, his smile would vanish. Still, she ignored it. She told herself she was imagining things. She loved him, and she believed he loved her back. Spring came, and Daniel's health improved. He was back at work, lifting heavy beams and working long hours. Emily thought they were moving forward. She even started talking about them, maybe getting a place together. Daniel would nod and say, "Yeah, maybe," but never commit to the idea. Then, one sunny afternoon in April, Emily saw something that sent a cold shiver down her spine. She had stopped by Daniel's site to drop off his lunch, and as she walked up, she saw him standing too close to a woman in a bright red dress. They were laughing, too closely, too comfortably. Daniel had his hand on the small of the woman's back, a touch that felt intimate, not friendly. When Daniel spotted Emily, his smile faltered. He introduced the woman as Jessica, a friend from the neighborhood, but something in his tone made Emily's stomach knot. Jessica's eyes flicked over Emily like she was a stranger who didn't matter. That night, Emily lay in bed staring at the ceiling. She wanted to believe it was nothing, but her instincts told her otherwise. Still, she said nothing. A week later, a small envelope arrived in Daniel's mailbox. Emily, grabbing the mail for him, noticed the handwriting, loopy and feminine. It smelled faintly of perfume. She handed it to him without comment, but the way he snatched it from her and stuffed it in his jacket made her blood run cold. By June, Emily's unease had turned into quiet dread. Daniel was more distant than ever. He avoided eye contact, spent more nights working late, and started locking his phone. When she asked if he still wanted to be with her, he said, "Don't start with that drama, Emily." Then came July, and with it, the day that would shatter her world. It was a hot afternoon, the kind where the air feels heavy. Emily was walking with Daniel downtown, near the busy intersection where buses and trucks passed every few seconds. She was talking about a trip they could take, maybe something to bring them closer again, when she felt his hand on her shoulder. At first, she thought he was guiding her across the street. Then, suddenly, that hand became a hard shove. The world spun. The roar of an engine filled her ears. And Emily realized in that split second that Daniel didn't want to fix things. He wanted her gone. The truck's horn blared. The sound of the truck's brakes was a deafening scream against the pavement. People shouted from every direction, some in panic, some in disbelief. The 18-wheeler lurched to a stop, just feet from Emily's body. She was sprawled on the hot asphalt, her legs twisted awkwardly beneath her, her head pounding from the impact of the fall. The driver jumped down from his cab, face pale, hands shaking. "Someone call 911, he yelled, his voice cracking. "I didn't hit her. I swear I didn't hit her." A small crowd had already gathered. One woman crouched beside Emily, speaking in a calm voice. "Stay with me, honey. Don't move. Help's coming." Emily's vision blurred, but her mind was sharp enough to register something chilling: Daniel's face. He was standing a few feet away, not rushing toward her, not kneeling beside her, not even looking at her directly. He was scanning the crowd instead, as if calculating something. A young man in a baseball cap pointed right at him. "I saw you," the man shouted. "You shoved her." Others started murmuring in agreement. Two people stepped forward, holding up their phones. "I got on video," one woman said, her voice trembling with shock. Daniel's eyes widened for a split second. Then he plastered on a look of horror. He finally rushed to Emily's side. "Baby, oh my God, are you okay?" His tone was dripping with forced panic. Emily wanted to speak, to tell everyone what really happened. But her chest hurt with every breath. The world kept tilting, and she could only gasp out, "Daniel!" before, within minutes, she was being loaded into an ambulance. As they lifted her, she saw a uniformed officer holding Daniel back. The officer was asking him questions, and Daniel was shaking his head, waving his arms as if trying to convince them of something. The ambulance door slammed shut, cutting off the sound. Emily's heart hammered in her chest, not just from pain, but from the icy realization that she had almost died at the hands of the man she had once loved. Back at the scene, Officer Grace Holloway was in charge. A seasoned Nashville detective with a reputation for catching details others missed, Grace had been only a few blocks away when the call came in. "Talk to everyone who saw it," she ordered her team. "I want names, numbers, and any footage." Witnesses were shaken but eager to talk. Several insisted they saw Daniel push Emily. Others described how he hung back before rushing to her side. And then came the crucial part. Two separate people had caught the shove on their phone cameras. By the time Grace approached Daniel, she already had an idea of what might have happened. "Mr. Price," she began, keeping her tone neutral, "we got multiple witness statements saying you pushed Ms. Davis into traffic. Can you tell me your version of events?" Daniel scoffed, running a hand through his hair. "That's crazy. We were crossing the street, and she tripped. I tried to grab her, but it was too late. People are just seeing what they want to see." Grace studied him. The sweat beading on his forehead wasn't just from the July heat. "Where were you and Ms. Davis headed this afternoon?" she asked. "Lunch," he replied quickly. "We were going to get sushi." She nodded slowly, filing away the answer. Something about his eagerness to explain, his darting eyes, It didn't sit right. At Vanderbilt Medical Center, Emily was being treated for a concussion, a fractured wrist, and deep bruising along her ribs. When she was stable, Grace came to see her. Emily hesitated at first, glancing toward the door. "Is Daniel here?" she asked quietly. "He's not in the building," Grace assured her. "You're safe right now." "But Emily," she pulled out her notepad. "I need to know what happened before you fell." Tears welled in Emily's eyes. She had nursed Daniel back to life, trusted him with her heart, and now she had to say out loud what she had been too scared to admit even to herself. "He pushed me," she whispered. "I don't know why, but he pushed me." Grace's pen scratched against the page. This wasn't just an accident anymore. This was an attempted murder investigation. By evening, the case was already gaining attention. Local news vans were parked outside the hospital, reporters eager to get a statement from Emily or the police. On social media, the witness videos were circulating, grainy but clear enough to see a figure who looked exactly like Daniel, his hands on Emily's back just before she stumbled into the street. Grace knew they had something solid, but the challenge now was to prove motive, and from the way Daniel had been looking around at the scene, like a man with something to hide, she was certain there was more to uncover. That night, she sat in her office reviewing the footage over and over. Every frame told a story, a shove, a pause, a calculated expression. But why? Why would a man try to kill the woman who had once saved his life? She picked up her phone and called her partner, Detective Ryan Holt. "We need to dig into Daniel Price," she said. "Everything, his finances, his calls, his messages. There's a reason he wanted her gone, and I want to know what it is before he tries again." What neither of them knew yet was that the trail would lead straight to another woman, a woman who had been in Daniel's life far longer than Emily realized. And she wasn't just part of his past. She was the reason Emily had almost died. The morning after the incident, Detective Grace Holloway sat at her desk with a coffee that had already gone cold. She had spent most of the night combing through Daniel Price's records. Credit card statements, phone logs, bank activity. Anything that might give her a foothold in this case. One thing jumped out immediately. 3 separate charges to a luxury boutique called La Rouge in downtown Nashville. Each purchase was within the last 2 months, each over $200. Grace doubted Emily's injuries and hospital bills matched with designer handbags and expensive perfume. The phone records were just as interesting. In the days leading up to the accident, Daniel had exchanged dozens of calls and text messages with single contact, saved only as Jay in his phone. Grace leaned back in her chair. "Jay," she murmured. Could that be Jessica, the woman Emily saw at the construction site? She didn't have to wait long for confirmation. Detective Ryan Holt walked in, tossing a manila folder onto her desk. "Ran a background on your guy. Guess who's been in his life longer than he's been with Emily? Jessica Harper. Known each other for years. She works at a real estate office near Daniel's job site. And get this, neighbors say she's been seen at his place more than once lately." Grace flipped open the folder. Jessica Harper's photo stared back at her, a striking brunette in her early 30s with a confident smile. Ryan continued. "Neighbors also say Emily hasn't been around Daniel's place as much lately. So either there's trouble in paradise, or he let the thought trail off, but Grace finished it in her head, or he'd been replacing Emily without her knowing." Back at the hospital, Emily was trying to piece her life back together from a hospital bed. Her wrist was in a cast, her ribs wrapped in tight bandages. Every breath reminded her of the shove, of Daniel's hand pressing her forward into danger. Her friend Sarah came to visit, holding a bouquet of sunflowers. "You don't have to talk about it if you're not ready," Sarah said gently. "But you do need to let the police handle this. He can't get away with what he did." Emily hesitated. "I keep wondering if I'm crazy, if maybe I slipped, but I can still feel his hand. And I know him. That look in his eyes. He wanted me gone." Sarah squeezed her uninjured hand. "Then tell the truth every single time they ask. Don't let him make you doubt yourself." Meanwhile, Grace and Ryan paid Jessica Harper a visit at her sleek downtown apartment. Jessica opened the door in a silk robe, her hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. "Detectives," she said coolly. "What can I do for you?" Grace got straight to the point. "We're investigating an incident involving Daniel Price and Emily Davis. Witnesses say Daniel pushed Emily into traffic. We know you've been in contact with him a lot lately." Jessica's smile barely faltered. "Daniel's a friend. We talk. But whatever happened between him and Emily has nothing to do with me." Ryan arched an eyebrow. "Then why did he buy you over $600 worth of gifts in the last 2 months? Jessica's eyes narrowed and her voice sharpened. "That's none of your business. And unless you've got a warrant, this conversation is over." She stepped back and shut the door firmly. Grace stared at the closed door. "She's lying," she muttered. "And if I had to bet, she knows exactly why Daniel wanted Emily out of the picture." The next few days were a grind. Grace's team followed up on leads, but some hit dead ends. One witness who claimed to have seen the shove up close suddenly couldn't remember clearly. Another, who had filmed it, got cold feet about handing over the footage, worried about being dragged into court. Even worse, Daniel had hired a lawyer, a slick, fast-talking defense attorney who was already pushing the she-trip narrative to anyone who would listen. Grace was in her office late one night, reviewing the slow-motion frame-by-frame of the phone video they had managed to secure. It was clear Daniel's hands were open, pushing forward. Emily's upper body lurched ahead unnaturally, nothing like a stumble. Ryan walked in with a fresh cup of coffee for her. "I've been thinking, what if this isn't just about Jessica? What if there's something bigger, like money?" Grace frowned. "Go on." "Life insurance," Ryan said. "Emily's a nurse. Good salary. Benefits. If Daniel convinced her to put him down as a beneficiary." Grace's eyes lit up. "We need to check that now." The following morning, their hunch paid off. Emily's HR department confirmed that, yes, Daniel was listed as the sole beneficiary on her life insurance policy, a policy worth $150,000. "Jessica and a payout," Ryan said grimly. "Looks like our boy had a retirement plan." Grace tapped her pen against her notebook. "Now we just have to prove he put it into motion." What they didn't know yet was that Daniel was already feeling the walls closing in. And when a suspect knows the police are circling, they can either run or they can strike again. The afternoon sun poured through the blinds in Emily's hospital room, but she barely noticed. She had just hung up the phone with Detective Grace Holloway, who had given her the shocking news about her life insurance policy. "I never even thought about it," Emily told Sarah, who sat beside her bed peeling an orange. "When we move in together, he said it was just a safety thing. I didn't think Daniel would ever—" Her voice cracked. "God, he was planning it." Sarah's eyes darkened. "Emily, you have to let them nail him for this. No giving him the benefit of the doubt. No second chances." Emily nodded, but she felt a gnawing fear in her gut. Daniel was out there, and now he knew she was still alive and talking. Meanwhile, across town, Daniel sat at the end of the sticky bar in a dimly lit dive. His lawyer, Matt Keaton, leaned against the counter beside him. "They got witnesses," Matt said flatly, "and the phone footage isn't great, but it's enough to make you look bad." Daniel scowled. "Then make it go away. That's your job." Matt sighed. "It's not that simple. If she keeps talking, we got a problem. The best thing for you is to play the doting boyfriend. Show the world you're heartbroken she got hurt. Make her look confused, maybe unstable." Daniel swirled a whiskey in his glass, eyes narrowing. "Or maybe she needs to shut up permanently." Matt stiffened. "Don't be stupid. If anything happens to her now, you're done. Do you understand?" Daniel didn't answer, but the tightness in his jaw said enough. 2 days later, Detective Grace Holloway and Ryan Holt were combing through the boutique's CCTV footage where Daniel had purchased the gifts for Jessica. In one clip, Daniel stood at the counter, paying for a gold necklace. Jessica was beside him, laughing. She leaned in, kissed his cheek. "Not exactly keeping it low profile," Ryan muttered. Grace smirked. "Arrogance is useful. People who think they're untouchable leave trails." Just then, her phone buzzed. It was Emily's number. But when she answered, she heard only a man's voice, low, mocking. "You're wasting your time, detective. You can't protect her forever. The line went dead. Grace's blood ran cold. That was Daniel, she said. He's escalating. Emily's fears were confirmed that night. Around 2 a.m., she woke to the sound of faint tapping at her hospital window. At first, she thought it was her imagination. Her room was on the second floor, after all. But then she saw it, a shadowy figure outside, half hidden by the darkness. She gasped and pressed the call button for the nurse. But when she looked back, the figure was gone. The nurse arrived, concerned, and called security. Hospital security swept the grounds but found nothing. Still, Grace's team took the incident seriously. "We'll get a guard outside your room," Grace assured Emily the next morning. "He's trying to rattle you. Don't let him see you scared." But Emily was scared, terrified, and she couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted. Grace doubled down on the investigation. She subpoenaed Daniel's bank accounts, hoping for a smoking gun. That's when she saw it. 3 large cash withdrawals in the last month, totaling nearly $20,000. Ryan leaned over her desk. "That's getaway money. He's planning something." Grace's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a patrol officer from South Nashville. "Detective, you're going to want to hear this. We just got a tip from a guy who works at a storage facility. Says Daniel Price rented a unit last month, paid cash, and he's been in and out of a lot lately." Grace's mind raced. A storage unit could mean anything: hidden evidence, weapons, or even proof of the affair. She stood, grabbing her jacket. "Let's go see what he's hiding." When they arrived at the facility, the manager walked them to Unit 47. "Hasn't been in today," he whispered, unlocking the door. Grace flicked on her flashlight and stepped inside. The small space smelled faintly of motor oil and something else: perfume. On one side sat a dusty duffel bag stuffed with cash. Next to it was a shoebox filled with letters, all in Jessica's handwriting. And then at the back of the unit, Grace's beam landed on something that made her stomach turn: printed screenshot of Emily's schedule from the hospital's internal system. "How the hell did he get this?" Ryan muttered. Grace didn't answer. She was already pulling out her phone. "He's not just thinking about the first attempt," she said grimly. "He's planning the next one." The next morning, Grace sat in the precinct's interview room with the duffel bag of cash, Jessica's letters, and the printed hospital schedule laid out neatly on the table. The evidence was damning, but it wasn't enough to lock Daniel away for attempted murder. Not yet. Ryan walked in, coffee in hand, and dropped into the chair across from her. "I ran the hospital schedule prints through their IT department," he said. "Turns out those came from a stolen staff login. Emily's co-worker reported her badge missing 2 weeks before the incident. Guess who was caught on security footage swiping it from her locker?" Grace's eyebrows shot up. "Daniel." Ryan nodded. "Plain as day. And here's the kicker. He didn't just take her schedule. He downloaded floor plans of the hospital, including patient room locations." Grace exhaled slowly. He was preparing for another hit. The first one didn't work, so he was going to try again inside the hospital. At Vanderbilt Medical Center, Emily was recovering slowly but determined to get stronger. She had a physical therapist helping her walk without limping, and the guard outside her door gave her some sense of safety. But that safety was shattered when a nurse she'd never seen before entered her room carrying a tray. "Time for your meds," the nurse said with a too bright smile. Emily frowned. "You're not my nurse. Where's Kelly?" Before the woman could answer, the guard stepped into the doorway. "Who are you?" he demanded. The nurse froze, eyes darting between them, then bolted for the hall. The guard chased her, but she was fast, disappearing down the stairwell. Later, Grace would confirm that the nurse had been wearing a stolen uniform and badge from another hospital entirely. Emily's hands shook as she told Grace what happened. "He's sending people after me," she whispered. "He won't stop." Grace squeezed her shoulder. "We're going to get him, Emily. I promise you." That promise became more than words later that afternoon. A call came into the tip line. An older man named Walter Green, who worked as a crossing guard near the intersection where Emily had been pushed. "I saw the whole thing," Walter said over the phone. "But I didn't come forward before because I didn't want trouble. But I can't sleep at night knowing what I saw. Grace and Ryan drove out to meet him. Walter was in his late 60s, wearing a neon vest and holding a stop sign. He pointed to a bench on the sidewalk. I was sitting right there, he said. I saw them coming down the street. She was talking. He was barely listening. Then, just as a truck came, he gave her this hard shove. Not an accident. Not a stumble. I know what I saw. Ryan asked, "Would you testify to that in court?" Walter nodded. "If it helps a young lady, yes." Grace's mind was spinning. With Walter's testimony, the security footage of him stealing the badge, and the storage unit evidence, the case against Daniel was tightening. But she knew Daniel. He wouldn't go down quietly. Back at the station, Grace was reviewing her notes when Ryan walked in looking grim. "We've got a problem. Jessica just booked a one-way ticket to Mexico. Leaves in 2 days." Grace's jaw tightened. She knows what's coming. Ryan leaned closer. "And get this, Daniel withdrew another $5,000 this morning. My guess? He's planning to meet her there." Grace grabbed her coat. "If they cross that border together, we might lose them. We need to move now." That night, as Daniel sat alone in his truck outside Jessica's apartment, his phone buzzed with a text from her. "We have to leave early. They're watching me." He tapped back quickly. "I'll handle it. One more stop first." Grace didn't know it yet, but that one more stop was Emily's hospital. And this time, he wasn't going to send someone else. The rain was coming down in heavy sheets that night, streaking the windows of Vanderbilt Medical Center and making the city lights blur into a smear of gold and red. Emily lay in bed, trying to lose herself in a paperback novel, but her eyes kept drifting to the door. The guard posted outside had stepped away minutes ago, probably grabbed coffee, and the silence felt different now. Too hollow. Then came the sound. A soft, deliberate click. The door eased open. Daniel stepped inside, dripping wet, his hood pulled low. For a moment, the sight of him made Emily's chest tighten. Not from love, but from the sudden, suffocating fear of realizing he had finally come to finish what he started. "Danny," she stammered, her voice trembling. "Were you?" "Sure," he said, holding up a hand. His tone was calm, almost gentle. "I just want to talk." Emily's heart pounded in her ears. "You tried to kill me." He smirked faintly. "You've been talking to the cops too much. They're filling your head with nonsense." Her fingers inched toward the call button on the bed, but Daniel's eyes flicked to the movement, and in 2 strides he was at her side, yanking the cord from the wall. "You've ruined everything," he said, his voice low but sharp. "Jessica and I could have been gone by now, but you just had to survive." Emily's pulse spiked. "Why? Was I that disposable to you?" He leaned in close, so close she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "It's not personal. It's just easier without you." Downstairs in the lobby, Detective Grace Holloway was signing in at the security desk. She had decided to check in on Emily personally after hearing from a nurse that Daniel had been seen lurking near the hospital earlier in the day. The guard station outside Emily's room was nowhere in sight when Grace stepped onto the floor. That alone made her instincts flare. She quickened her pace down the hall. Inside the room, Daniel was pulling a syringe from his jacket pocket, the clear liquid inside catching the dim light. Emily's breath caught. "What is that?" she demanded, panic edging her voice. "Something quick," he said, almost casually. "You won't feel a thing." Emily's mind raced. She had no weapon, no time, but she remembered something Sarah told her. "Stall him. Keep him talking." "You said you loved me once," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "Was that ever true?" Daniel froze for just a second, the needle hovering midair. That pause was all she needed. Her foot shot out, kicking the rolling tray beside her bed into his knee. The syringe slipped from his hand, skittering across the floor. The door burst open. "Police, step away from her." Grace's voice was like steel. She had her gun drawn, eyes locked on Daniel. He straightened, breathing hard, but his smirk returned. "You got no proof I was doing anything," he said slowly. Grace nodded toward the syringe on the floor. "We'll see what the lab says about that. Hands where I can see them." For a moment, Daniel looked like he might lunge for the syringe, but Ryan appeared in the doorway behind Grace, his taser ready. Daniel lifted his hands, but his glare at Emily was pure venom. "This isn't over," he muttered. Grace's stomach twisted at the threat. She knew she had him, for now, but unless they tied him directly to the first attempt on Emily's life, he could still walk free. Back at the precinct, Grace stared at the case board. They had the syringe, the storage unit, the stolen badge, the cash, Jessica's letters, Walter's testimony. But Daniel's lawyer was already making noise about coincidences and overzealous police work. Ryan dropped into the seat beside her. "We're running out of time before his lawyer pushes for bail. We need something ironclad that links him to the shove in the street." Grace tapped her pen against the desk. Then we go back to the beginning. Somewhere in that original scene, there's a detail we missed, and I'm going to find it. What she didn't know was that the missing detail, the one piece that would nail Daniel beyond any shadow of a doubt, was already sitting in evidence. They just hadn't looked at it closely enough. Grace sat in the evidence room long after most of the precinct had emptied for the night. The hum of the fluorescent lights overhead was the only sound as she sifted through the boxes from the day of the accident. Witness statements, stills from phone footage, traffic camera captures. Everything was here. She had been over it all before, but something nagged at her. What am I not seeing? She spread the phone footage printouts across the table, each frame capturing a fraction of a second. Her eyes tracked the sequence. Emily and Daniel walking. Emily talking, Daniel looking ahead, and then the shove. Grace leaned closer. Just before the shove, Daniel's head turned, not toward Emily, but toward the intersection light. It was green for them, but an 18-wheeler was speeding through, its driver clearly trying to beat the yellow. Daniel's timing was too perfect. She flipped through to the next frame and froze. In the reflection of a shop window behind them, you could see Daniel's face. He wasn't startled or reacting in panic. He was smiling. Her pulse quickened. "That's it," she whispered. The reflection wasn't obvious in the grainy phone footage, but it was there. The kind of damning image a jury couldn't ignore. She called Ryan immediately. "Get over here," she said. "We got our smoking gun." The next morning, Grace had the footage sent to the forensics unit. They enhanced the frames, isolating the reflection. The grin on Daniel's face, just millisecond before the shove, was unmistakable and chilling. Ryan slapped the printout onto her desk. "This is intent. This kills the whole she tripped story." Grace grinned. "Now we take it to the DA before his lawyer gets him out on bail." At the same time, Jessica Harper was making her own moves. She'd been keeping her phone off, staying indoors and avoiding her office. But when she finally opened her front door that morning, she found a folded note on the mat. "If I go down, so do you?" She froze. It was Daniel's handwriting. The note meant one thing. He was willing to burn her to save himself. Jessica's survival instinct kicked in. Within hours, she was at the precinct, demanding to speak to Grace. "I'm not going to prison for him," Jessica blurted the moment she sat down in the interview room. "He told me he was going to get rid of Emily. Said she was in the way, that the life insurance would set us up. I thought he was bluffing until I saw the news." Grace stayed calm, but inside she felt the rush of victory. "Will you testify to that in court?" Jessica hesitated, then nodded. "If it means I walk away, yes." With Jessica's statement, Walter's eyewitness account, the storage unit evidence, the stolen badge, and now the reflection from the footage, Grace had built an airtight case. The DA agreed to push for a no-bail hold until trial. Still, Grace knew Daniel wouldn't go quietly. That evening, as Grace left the precinct, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Enjoy your win, detective. But remember, doors don't stay locked forever." Grace stared at the screen, jaw tightening. "Not if I can help it," she muttered. The following morning, court was packed for Daniel's bail hearing. Emily sat near the front, Sarah by her side, gripping her hand. Grace watched from the back as the prosecution laid out the evidence piece by piece. When the reflection photo appeared on the screen, a murmur rippled through the courtroom. Daniel's lawyer shifted uncomfortably, but the damage was done. The judge denied bail. Emily exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. But Grace knew the real fight. The trial was still ahead. And Daniel wasn't done playing games. The trial began 3 months later, drawing crowds of reporters and curious locals. The case had all the makings of a true crime headline. Love, betrayal, money, an almost fatal attempt that had been caught on camera. Emily sat at the prosecution's table, her wrist fully healed but her ribs still aching on cold mornings. Sarah was in the gallery behind her, a constant presence of support. Across the room, Daniel sat with his lawyer, wearing a tailored suit and that same smug smile he'd worn the day Grace first met him. The prosecution opened strong. They showed the jury the enhanced footage with the shop window reflection, Daniel's grin frozen in time just before the shove. They presented the stolen hospital badge, the syringe recovered from Emily's hospital room, and the $20,000 in cash hidden in his storage unit. Then came Walter Green's testimony. The courtroom was silent as the elderly crossing guard described exactly what he saw that day, Daniel's deliberate shove, the timing with the oncoming truck. Finally, Jessica Harper took the stand. Her voice trembled as she admitted she'd been in a relationship with Daniel while he was with Emily. She told the jury how Daniel had talked about getting rid of her and cashing in on the life insurance. By the time the prosecution rested, the air in the courtroom felt heavy. The defense tried to fight back, painting Daniel as a victim of circumstantial evidence and emotional exaggerations from a woman who misread an accident. They claimed Jessica was lying to save herself. But then came Grace Holloway, called as a final witness. She walked the jury step by step through the investigation, how every piece of evidence connected, how Daniel's behavior before and after the incident showed premeditation. She ended with one simple statement. Emily Davis is alive today because the truck driver was able to stop. But make no mistake, Daniel Price wanted her dead. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Emily sat frozen in her seat. When they finally filed back in, the foreperson stood. On the charge of attempted first-degree murder, we find the defendant guilty. Gasps filled the room. Daniel's jaw tightened, the smile finally gone. The judge sentenced him to 28 years in prison, without the possibility of parole, for at least 20. As the bailiffs moved to take him away, he turned his head toward Emily. "This isn't over," he hissed. Emily met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "Yes, it is." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, but Emily kept her focus on Sarah and Grace. "Thank you," she told Grace quietly. "You didn't just save my life. You gave me my life back." Grace smiled faintly. "You did that yourself, Emily. You survived. You fought." Emily glanced up at the clear blue Nashville sky. For the first time in months, the air felt lighter. She knew the scars, both seen and unseen, would take time to heal, but she was free. And Daniel Price would spend the rest of his days behind bars, with nothing but his own choices for company.